darkness reigns. Luke's version of this is pretty succinct, pretty cut and dried. We've talked about Judas before, so I'm not going to get into that. We did that early on when it talked about Judas deciding to betray Jesus and take the money. If you put the different accounts, in fact, I believe it's Matthew's account, maybe John's, one of those, where as the soldiers approach him, the guard that's come with them, Jesus says, "Who are you here for?" And they say, "For Jesus." And he says, "I am him." And they don't arrest him, they fall to their knees. And he asks them again, and they tell him, and he goes, "I've told you, I'm him, leave these others alone." There was a power and a presence there in all this.
Ken, now would you have turned around and said, this is not a good idea?
I would like to think so, but I wasn't there, so I'm not going to, look down on these guys too much. You go out to do a job, I mean, they're soldiers. They're the temple security. They do what they're told. But it had to be weird. This person who has such a following, such presence, heals this guy's ear right in front. I mean, if you're a soldier, you've seen people get maimed. You've seen people get hurt. And Jesus just reaches out, touches him, and his ear is whole. It's reattached.
That's just unbelievable to me how, I guess there was so much hatred.
Yeah.
So much, it was so aggravated,
Because you have some of the chief priests, some of the scribes, some of those who are there with the mob, and they see it happen, and they're still going to take him back and mock him and beat him and persecute him and hand him over to Pilate. I mean, the hatred runs deep.
Well, it had to hurt.
Nobody puts on ears.
Yeah, he didn't just stand there. No, it had to hurt. I mean, he had to just cry out.
Oh, I'm sure he was on the ground or, yeah, that
He wouldn't just stand there smiling.
no, not at all. And I've always wondered about that guy. He was the servant of the chief priest. He was probably the one sort of leading the group. How did he feel by the time he got Jesus back, knowing he had just been maimed and healed all really quick,
John's account where they all fell to the ground.
It was John, yeah. Now we get, if you jump down to verse 54, we get to the part with Peter. And it's amazing how fast it goes with Peter. Because at one moment, he's swinging the sword, ready to chop Malchus's head off for coming after Jesus. Of course, Jesus stops him. They arrest Jesus. They take him. Peter follows at a distance. All right, so look at verse 54. Then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance, and when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." "Man, I am not," Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, "Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord spoken to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. Again, you put the different accounts together. Some of the accounts say, Peter swore. That meant he was taking an oath. Right? There was not swearing the way we think of swearing. In Jesus' day, there was no such thing as a 4-letter word. Right? That is a modern Puritan invention. There were no bad words back then. We created them long after. What he was doing was swearing by an oath that he didn't know Jesus. Now, how quickly did it turn? Just a few hours. At most, from him trying to chop Malchus's head off to him swearing to God that he didn't know who Jesus was. How do you move that far that fast?
He had Jesus there at the beginning. It was with Jesus. all he needed.
Yep.
He'd seen everything that had gone on. His power and his security was with Jesus. When he's by himself, he's gone.
Yeah, his world had changed drastically in those couple hours or 3 hours, however long it was. The person he depended on was arrested, was in the high priest's house. We find out being beaten and mocked and everything else. It's amazing how fast we can switch.
Well, fear is one of the strongest motivators for humans.
Absolutely. Especially in the moment. Fear is a terrible motivator for long-term change because fear eventually dies down. We get